Teacup, Tempest by Wigworm. All the jewelry shops in Konoha sucked, Kakashi thought to himself as he perused the goods that they were hawking. All the rings that he found were gaudy and overdone and uninspired. There wasn't a single thing that he saw that he'd wanted to give to Maki when he told her that he loved her and wanted to marry her. Finally having had enough, Kakashi used the Shinshin in a fit of pique, vanishing and reappearing next to the memorials. He brooded for a moment, silently ranting about idiots to Obito. And this was the first and only time that he was ever going to ask someone to marry him, and it had to be perfect. He liked things when they were perfect. It meant that there were no flaws, and there was nothing he had to worry about. And that meant that he couldn't ask Maki to marry him without the perfect ring! A sudden thought came to him as he was fingering his weapons pouch. It would be unorthodox, but they were pretty unorthodox people themselves. He pulled out one of his specifically made kunai and looked it over. It was pretty much perfect for this task. He unwound the leather from the handle, leaving behind only the tungsten metal kunai behind. He wouldn't need that much of the metal, so he would be able to keep the blade and most of the handle and just melt down the ring at the end. These kunai had been made for him by his father when he'd only been 5 and graduated from the academy as the youngest graduate ever. He'd kept them even through what had seemed to be his father's betrayal of Konoha. They were special to him, and he'd once spent 2 days going through the blood and guts and muck of a battleground to find every last one that he'd used. Minato-sensei hadn't been pleased to be held back from going home, but Kakashi hadn't cared, and still didn't care. These were special to him. There were none else like them in the world. Slowly, he heated his hands with fire and lightning, coating his skin with chakra to protect his hands. It took several minutes before the combined heat managed to even affect the metal. By the time he'd gotten the metal to 6,000 degrees Fahrenheit, his hands were red and he was sure that he was going to be sporting burns for days. At 6,100 degrees, the metal started to bend in his hands. At 6,200 degrees, the metal started to slowly melt. Using chakra, he created a circular shape and slowly filled it with the liquid tungsten. By the time that the ring was made and he had managed to cool it down enough to touch it, he was well into the first stages of chakra exhaustion. He could mold half a dozen Reikiri before stepping into the stages of chakra exhaustion, but he'd been burning his chakra hard and bright for far longer than ever before. He wasn't surprised to be so tired. Azuma spoke up from where he was watching. "Kakashi, what are you doing?" Kakashi breathed deeply and blinked several times. "Making a ring." "I can see that. Why?" Azuma stepped closer and stared at the polished, silver-looking ring in Kakashi's hand. "And out of what?" "It's for Maki," Kakashi murmured, "and it's tungsten." Wide-eyed, Azuma stared at Kakashi. "As in, tungsten, the only chakra-conducting metal known to mankind?" he asked. "For Maki-san?" "I'm going to marry her," Kakashi murmured, collapsing to his knees. "And this is going to be her ring." Catching the man before he toppled over and hit the ground, Azuma gently helped him into a seated position. He sat next to the copynin and offered up a hand with carefully blank chakra for the man to leech. Chakra sharing was especially difficult and only done when both giver and taker were calm and collected. If chakra sharing went wrong, you could find pieces of people scattered over a 2-mile radius after the always violent explosion. "So," Azuma spoke quietly, "you aren't married to her yet?" "No." Kakashi grasped Azuma's hand and started leeching at the offered chakra like a newborn at a mother's breast. "But she's the only one that I'd ever consider marrying." Azuma chuckled. "The clans will be happy. They thought you might off yourself before continuing the Hatake clan." He thought for a moment. "Wait, Hito doesn't have white chakra." "No." Kakashi smirked, not minding that Azuma still thought Hito was biologically his, even after telling his friend that the boy wasn't. "He has his mother's talents." "Maki-san has a bloodline?" Azuma asked, wonderingly. Kakashi sort of nodded his head. "It's enough like one that Hito inherited it." He didn't know who the father was, so he couldn't say that the boy hadn't gotten another bloodline. And he knew that he was prevaricating on Hito's parentage, but he also knew how Hito had come to be, and he didn't want to spread that information around, not even to his friend. And he wasn't lying, because Hito had the same amazing healing that his mother had, and Kakashi was pretty sure that it was either the beginning of a bloodline or a mild one. Feeling better, Kakashi disengaged from the chakra sharing and thanked Asuma with a smile and a nod. Asuma nodded back and they both stood up. "So," Asuma grinned widely. "Can I see it?" Kakashi handed the ring over. He didn't even have a moment of doubt that he should let Asuma see it, because he knew Asuma and he trusted the other man. Trust for shinobi was rare and dangerous, but Kakashi liked a little danger in his life. "It's amazing," Asuma mumbled, looking the ring over. "There haven't been any chakra weapons made in a long time, because no one has the affinities or the chakra levels to make a full weapon. I didn't even know that you knew how to do this." He hefted the ring that he was talking about. Kakashi shrugged. "I didn't do the hard part. I just remolded the metal. Oto-sama made the kunai over 20 years ago." "It's impressive nonetheless, Kakashi." Asuma carefully handed the ring back, and Kakashi tucked it away, making sure that it was safer than his porn on his person. It was too important to be careless with. Asuma grasped his elbow, and Kakashi glanced back to him, curious. Asuma smiled. "I think she'll love it." "I hope so," Kakashi muttered under his breath. He wasn't sure what Maki thought about marriage, as they'd never discussed it, but he was hopeful. "When are you going to ask?" the Sarutobi asked, as they made their way through the trees quickly, heading towards the hospital. The burns on Kakashi's hands would need looking at, and it was always good to have a second opinion post-chakra sharing. Occasionally, there could be problems after the sharing if the disconnection was done wrong, or anything was done wrong, for that matter. It wasn't a surprise that it was rarely, if ever, used. Some villages, such as Bloody Mist, had never even heard of it, and that was evident from how their shinobi treated each other. Kakashi shrugged, keeping his hands close to his body so he wouldn't hit anything with the tender skin. Maki was more than worth the pain. "I don't know yet. Soon. I don't want to lose her." "You won't," Asuma told him. "Maki's loved you for possibly as long as you've loved her." Kakashi shot a glance over to the man. "And how long have I loved her?" He'd only recently learned that he loved Maki, and he wondered how long he'd been acting that way. Asuma would be one of the better judges of that. "The first time I saw you two together, I knew you loved her." Asuma smirked. "By the way, I'm claiming the burns. You don't want the lecture, and I don't mind the reputation boost." "Sure," Kakashi snorted. "I don't really care." Besides, Asuma had given him burns like this once before, so the man did have the skills to back the boast. Asuma smiled broadly. "And I mean the lecture from Maki, not the medics." Kakashi blanched for a moment, and then nodded. "I see your point." "Thought you would," the bearded man murmured quietly, laughing under his breath. Kakashi glared at him, but couldn't help but laugh as well. He was too excited from having finally found the perfect ring for Maki to be grumpy about anything. The medics were quick to check both of them over and double-check their sharing, which they did get a lecture for since it was unnecessary, due to them being in a village at the time, and then they were released from the hospital. Medics had learned early with Jonin that they healed best where they felt safest. Kakashi had spent far more time in his own bed healing than he had in a hospital. "Still no thoughts on when you're going to ask her?" Asuma inquired lightly as they walked down the hall to their apartments. They lived on the same floor, in the same building. But that wasn't a surprise since they were both around the same age, rank, and current status at the moment. Status being Ganin team leaders. Not that their job status was anything to do with where they lived, but it was something that drew them closer as friends. "Nope." Kakashi looked his hands over, blowing lightly over the clear cream one of the medics had coated his hands with. "Open my door for me?" he asked, and Asuma laughed, nodding. Before Asuma could touch the door handle, it turned and the door swung out. Maki bustled about for a moment, arms full of Hito and various items such as a baby bag, a backpack, and several skulls. "Ah! Kakashi, you're home!" Maki breathed in relief. "Listen, I have to do some shopping today, and I was going to ask you to watch Hito-chan, but you weren't here when I got home, so I made a list of stuff, and I'm just on my way to take Hito back to the daycare." "What did you do to your hands?" Maki dropped everything except for Hito, passing the child to Asuma, and gently took Kakashi's wrists in her hands, turning his hands over so she could see the extent of the redness. "These look like chakra birds! She exclaimed. Kakashi's eye opened a bit wider than usual, and he glanced at Asuma. Maki took it the wrong way and turned on the man. Did you do this to Kakashi? Seriously, Azuma-san? He has a son! What are you doing sparring hard enough to do that? Maki-san? Azuma juggled the wiggling toddler in his arms, who was reaching excitedly for Kakashi. It's not really my fault. And do I feel blank chakra in your coils? She rounded on Kakashi again, and the Captain flinched. If there was one thing that Maki didn't understand, it was chakra sharing. She couldn't clean her chakra for the life of her, and she never ran out. So she never saw the point of taking chakra from someone else. Because of that, she only vaguely understood that sometimes it was just necessary. And as Kakashi had heard in the ER, it hadn't been necessary this time. He smiled, though, and cupped Maki's cheek lightly so as not to smear the gel, soothing a worry line from the corner of her eye with the edge of his thumb. It was an exercise in trust, Maki-chan. You shouldn't have been sparring that hard, Maki grumbled for a moment, but then let it go. Are you going to be home for a while, or should I still take Hito to the daycare? Nah, Kakashi scratched the back of his head with his wrist, watching Hito climb over Azuma like a little monkey. I'll be home for the rest of the day if nothing else comes up. He opened an arm and hugged Maki to him gently when she cuddled into his body. You can leave Hito with me. Thanks, Kakashi. Maki smiled brightly up at Kakashi, and Kakashi felt his heart melt. Ango and Azuma were right. He loved her, and he'd loved her for a very long time.